Welcome to History 338, History of Japan, Week 1, Part 2. Some years ago, back in 2004, there was a movie called 50 First Dates starring Drew Barrymore and Adam Sandler. And Drew Barrymore in the film suffers from a certain form of amnesia caused by an accident she had, so that she cannot remember the very recent past. So every day she wakes up and it's the same day, right before her accident. And so Adam Sandler plays a character who falls in love with her, and literally, instead of having a first date, every date is like a first date, 50 first dates. The reason why I always refer to this in my classes is because it refers to history, but it refers to history in a totally different sense. It refers to each and every one of us and how we use our memory, our history, to exist in life and to cherish life, and what it would be like if you lose some of that memory, which we know with some of our family and loved ones may be occurring through things like dementia, and how difficult that must be. So, this is the transition then between that movie and history. The two very well-known public historians, David Kivig and Myron Marty, state that social memory serves both society and individuals, as personal memory serves the individual alone and possesses all the same values and flaws. So what do we mean by those values and flaws? Well, we're going to get to that in a second, but first of all, let's define history. History is the study of change across time and place. And you may ask yourself, you may say, well, that is a really kind of different definition of history. I thought history was just something, static. It was back there. It was unchanging. But in fact, it's not. It's the fascinating thing about history is we're studying change across both time, but also place. Now, we might define civilization as humankind's attempt to bring stability and meaning to an uncertain and changing world. And this is, I think, understandable when we look at ourselves or we look at our friends, our family. Generally there are a few different kinds of personality types that seem, in terms of how they view time and life. Some people just love change. They love almost constant change. They seem to go from partner to partner, right? Girlfriend, boyfriend to girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And they seem to have many friends. They seem to be outgoing. They can't even have the same apartment or condominium, or maybe even live in the same city or the same nation for very long. Now, that's a very few number of people out there in general. Then there are a few people that just absolutely can't stand change. It upsets their whole life view. It seems to offer no guarantee. So again, one of my favorite TV shows is The Big Bang Theory, and Sheldon does not like change. Sheldon likes things to be exactly the way they are. Every day he arrives at work at a certain time, and everyone knows that he has his bowel movement at 8:20 in the morning, and he likes to sit on the same side of the couch all the time, etc. But the vast majority of us, lie somewhere in between, right? We like some change. We like to go on vacation. We like to try different foods, meet different people, read different books, go ahead and have different recreation every now and then. But we certainly like the fact that we have certain stability in our lives, whether it be jobs or relationships or anything else. And sometimes it can destabilize us when those things change. So civilization is our attempt to kind of all come together, all of us, and to be able to provide some stability and meaning in this unchanging world. It's like our social, political insurance policy. Now, civilizations tend to be successful when they monitor their political and military conditions. That is, when their perceptions of those conditions are fairly accurate reflections of the reality on the ground. They tend to be successful when they're flexible in the response to changing conditions, when they recognize and reward successful leaders, and perhaps most importantly, when they learn from their mistakes. Now, if you turn that all on its head, then you can say just the opposite of those things produce an unsuccessful civilization. Unsuccessful civilizations don't successfully monitor their political and military conditions, and their perceptions of what's happening out there are way out of touch with the reality on the ground. And maybe they're inflexible or just plain complacent in regard to changing conditions. Maybe they're governed by cliques who are not open to new leadership and new ideas, and very often they do not learn from their own mistakes. Psychologists know that perceptions and realities can be widely different. Things are not always what they appear to be. So is this the illustration of a white goblet? Or is this the illustration of two lovers? You can see their nose and their lips coming together and getting ready to embrace. Is this an illustration of a beautiful young girl, and there's her eyelashes and her nose and her chin, and she has a beret on, and here is her lovely hair, and this is her fur around her neck? Or is this the picture of an old lady, and those are her eyes, and that's her big nose and her big chin and her little smile? Or is this the picture of an old man with a giant walrus mustache, and this is his big old nose and his mustache, walrus mustache, and his little smile? Perceptions and realities are important. Mohandas Gandhi, the great leader of India, once said, "A man is but a product of his thoughts. What he thinks, that he becomes." If our perceptions of reality and reality itself do not really jive, they're really not parallel, then I think that leads to not only unhealthy relationships in our own lives and an unhealthy maybe mental outlook on our own, but it does in society too. It leads to an unhealthy society, an unhealthy civilization, an unhealthy nation. If, however, those are generally aligned pretty well and sort of parallel one another, then we've got a more healthy society. Kivig and Marty, who we just quoted a few minutes ago, said, as human society evolved, distorted memory and current belief repeatedly forged social myths, popular conceptions of past phenomena independent of verification, but with strong, sometimes helpful, but more often baleful influences. History is an approach to understanding earlier times that diminishes the imperfections of memory and myth. That diminishes the imperfections of memory and myth. So just as we're searching for in our critiques, searching for through critical thinking, through that analysis and synthesis process, those processes, we try to uncover as objectively as we can what the past tells us about itself, not what we project upon the past. So we need to be somewhat flexible, like Gumby and Pokey. We have to understand that throughout history, successful leadership has entailed the ability to seek and maintain a balance of power between power brokers. You know, no one has 100% absolute control. And if they do have 100% absolute control, it's only because other people are supporting them in the background. And they may or may not support them forever. Look at the case of Hitler. So power brokers could include government officials at the national, state, city level, political party, business owners, religious leaders, military officials, fraternal organizations, civic associations, mass movement, etc., etc. But when it comes down to whether a society is healthy and prosperous and progressive, it really is more related to leadership. And the great management guru in the United States, Peter Drucker, perhaps said it best when he said, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. There's a difference. We can learn from our mistakes. As Norman Cousins has said, history is a vast early warning system. Or as Pope John Paul II left in a quote in his visit to the Peace Museum at Hiroshima in Japan, and it is now engraved upon a stone at the entrance to the kind of Peace Park in the museum, to remember the past is to commit oneself to the future. I especially like this because it says that we look at the past objectively. We don't blame ourselves for the past because we had nothing to do with it. We don't let that make us guilty, but we do say that what ancestors have done means that we need to commit ourselves perhaps differently to the future itself. Or as George Santayana, the great philosopher, said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Unsuccessful civilizations and societies then experience changing conditions, and I like to look at sometimes as their fall and rise as really consisting of a combination of internal and external problems. And this is the external problem. So imagine a civilization like Rome or China, or at one point in time we're going to see it with Japan. And here are the strong barbarians coming in from outside who are going to overrun the country or the empire, and it's going to fall. But that doesn't really happen unless the empire, the country, the dynasty, or whatever is getting a little bit flabby, losing muscle structure, not being strong enough to defend itself. So really what we see very often when dynasties fall, or in the case of Japan, when we see these political machinations and military maneuvers that lead from one shogun to another, etc. What is happening is that internally things are beginning to weaken and fall apart. And outside that internal framework, there is an external, a strength that is impinging itself upon and taking over. You can learn a lot about Japanese history and about Japanese culture through stories. And I want to tell one that is very popular in Japan, and it's the story of a dog named Hachiko. And Hachiko has a statue, a bronze statue, that has been erected to him at Shibuya Station in Tokyo. Why would that be? Well, Hachiko was a dog who was the 8th in his litter, hence Hachi, which is Japanese for 8, and Ko, which means like little prince, so it means like 8th little prince. So he was 8th in his litter, and he was adopted as a pet by a professor in the Department of Agriculture at the well-known University of Tokyo, and his name was Hidesaburo Ueno. And Ueno adopted him in 1924, and there he is, the real Hachiko, and here is his statue at Shibuya Station. And in 1925, and what the dog did, Hachiko, every day followed his master off to Shibuya Station, where he took the subway off to the University of Tokyo, and every day at the same time his master would come home and Hachiko would meet Professor Ueno. And then in 1925, while he was at work, Professor Ueno suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, and he died. For 9 years afterwards, Hachiko came to the station every day looking for his master. Now, the Japanese love this story because it's a story that talks a lot about loyalty and faithfulness. And it's a story that has been told in films and in children's books and repeated again and again. And it is about loyalty. And that loyalty is very much a part of the group consensus and identity of the Japanese people. We can talk about the individualism that we experience in the United States. And we know what that is because that really sort of defines us. We are first and foremost individuals. But we are also members of groups. We might be a member of a group at our workplace. Or we might be a member, well, our workplace itself is a group. Our school is a group. But we might be a member of a specific club. We might have certain friends, and those are a group. Or maybe we have a certain church or synagogue or temple, and that is a group. But over and above everything, Americans are individualistic. In Asia, over and above everything, not only in Japan and China and Korea and the Philippines and Southeast Asia and India, the group is the more important thing. It takes precedent. It takes priority. And individualism is important, but it is secondary to the group consensus. Some people say that part of this is due to the whole philosophy of Confucianism, which the book Confucius Lives Next Door will talk a little bit about, and we'll talk about more in another subsequent lecture. We might ask the question of where does the truth lie? To what extent? What is the depth and the breadth of this understanding of where group consensus in Asian philosophy, culture, and history comes from? And so we're going to be doing a lot more digging deeper in this 8-week course. And we're going to be looking at several things. We're going to be looking at how the Japanese have viewed their own culture, their own politics, their own economy. And we're also going to be reading some things which show how Westerners have viewed the Japanese. And then we're going to read things and talk about how the Japanese have viewed Westerners. And through all of this interplay, we're going to see these differences. And in the end, you might end up saying, well, you know, some of this is more complicated than I ever could have imagined. And you might also say that some of this we have complicated ourselves in order to see the things, perhaps, that we want to see. So we're trying to look for some objectivity, some critical thinking as our critiques, some analysis and synthesis. I like this cartoon. Send this back to the legal department. I think they could make it much more complicated than this. Well, a lot of what we're going to deal with in this class and with any class that deals with a different culture other than our own are stereotypes. And as everyone knows, stereotypes can be biased, obviously, and they're an attempt to say, well, you know, just about everyone of this culture looks or acts this particular way, which of course is a dangerous thing for any of us to say or do. However, it seems to be convenient to our psychological makeup and the way our brain operates to sometimes put people in categories and boxes, even if those categories are not necessarily true or only have a grain of truth. I think the stereotypes can be seen as even somewhat hilarious. I love cartoons and I love The Simpsons, which is, you know, one of the great social commentaries of our time. And they have an episode called 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, which really, if you have time, go to this website and look at it. And it shows American stereotypes of Japanese and Japanese stereotypes of Americans. And that's kind of a good place for us to start, so that we're not so deeply involved that we lose sight of the things that are really important and get all worried and upset and offended by things that really aren't supposed to be that offensive. Well, what are some of the differences between, say, poverty in Japan and poverty in the United States? Well, there's a big difference between the two. As you can see here, Japan ranks above the United States when the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development looks at things like poverty. You can see that the rates of poverty in the United States are greater than they are in Japan. But even more telling is the income inequality, which in Japan is just much less than it is in the United States. So, typically Japanese CEOs will earn much less than their American counterparts, and there'll be quite a bit of difference between what a CEO earns and a common employee earns in the United States than there will be in Japan. We also have many more attorneys in the United States than there are in Japan. In the United States, we have one attorney for about every 250 people. In Japan, they have one for every 4,000 people. Now, this is not me attorney bashing, not at all. It's simply a reflection of the fact that why do we need so many attorneys in the United States? Why in Japan do they need many, many fewer attorneys? It says something about the culture. It says something about the history. Even more telling are crime rates between the United States and Japan. And those vary in every category. They vary in the number of prisoners, in the number of violent crimes committed, not so much in things like white-collar crime, like bribes and so forth, but much greater differences in crime rates. So why is Japan a safer place? And many of us who have visited Japan, and I had a summer fellowship in Japan once, know that, sometimes you can, forget things, leave them on trains, and all of a sudden they make it back to you, and you're saying to yourself, wow, I had a friend whose camera was lost he left it on a train, and it ended up, the conductor or somebody picked it up or reported to the conductor, and it ended up getting to his next destination, to his hotel. Would that happen in many places in the U.S. where somebody would say, free camera, let's take this? So what does that say about the differences in culture and history, etc.? Well, we're going to start it all out with a wonderful book. And it's the true story of T.R. Reid, a well-known journalist, who moves with his family to Japan to head up the Tokyo bureau of the Washington Post. It's an absolutely captivating book that you will not be able to put down. It is an easy read. You will be able to read it in probably an hour and a half or so. And as you read it, you're going to come across all kinds of examples which are going to introduce you to this conception of what it means to have group consensus be a priority above individualism, and how the two, in fact, differ. In fact, those differences are clearly outlined, and even the subtitle states it all, what living in the East teaches us about living in the West. Sometimes we don't even realize how our own culture and history and politics differ until we study the politics, history, and culture of another place. Think about the title, Confucius Lives Next Door. What's he talking about? Who is Confucius? Is it really simply his next door neighbor? Or is it our bigger next door neighbor, Japan itself? So when you read this, choose something from the book i.e., which means that is, literally about Japan today, something that interests you, and write a critique about it. Maybe you're interested in Japanese schools, just one thing, or culture, or entertainment, philosophy, religion, festivals, young people, how young people get jobs, corporate life, economy, politics, politeness, manners, crime, whatever, police, whatever you find intriguing about Japan today that you'd like to know a little bit more about it. And my typical way of teaching history is we kind of start with some of these general themes about what a place looks like currently, in the present, now. And then we work back through the history to pick up when these themes, this culture, this history, how it developed, how it came to be what it is today. So my belief is we understand history best when we can pick out the themes of today and see how they were different and how they changed across the course of the years. If you have any questions, feel free to email or phone me. I'm always happy to help, and have a great week.